Have you ever had an awkward conversation with someone about your faith or what it means to be a Christ follower? I remember a while back I was at this event and there was a bunch of college students around and we began talking about colleges and majors and eventually the conversation got to me and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to school for leadership and ministry." And one of the guys goes, "Oh, that's cool. What brand of Christian are you?" And I was confused by his question, so I said, "What do you mean, what brand of Christian am I?" And he goes, "Well, my grandmother, she's a Christian and she doesn't believe in technology. She considers it a gateway for the devil and the mark of the beast or something like that." And then another guy spoke up and he said, "Yeah, my uncle, he's a Christian and he doesn't enjoy sports because he says that it's a form of idolatry and that we should stay away from that." Then other people began to tell me what they thought being a Christian was based off what they had seen and heard from other proclaimed Christians. And what I realized by talking with them is that they had heard a bunch of traditions and man made religion to where religion became the faith and Christ got completely excluded from the process. If we think about it, I know I could ask many of you, what does it mean to be a Christian? And 9 times out of 10, everyone will give a different answer to some degree. And that is okay, but when you're talking to someone who doesn't know God at all, and they're simply asking, "How do I find Jesus?" and they're getting all these different versions of it, what does that leave the lost person to believe? Are they going to think to themselves, "This is the faith that God has called me into"? Or do you think they'll walk away completely? But I thank God that in His infinite wisdom, that He laid it all out for us when it comes to what it truly means to be a Christian. While there may be different denominations and different expressions of faith, there are still some things that should be weaved into the hearts and minds of every believer, no matter what your belief system is or traditions are, or even what church you attend. When you think about Jesus walking on earth and doing his ministry, it wasn't necessarily what Jesus was doing, but how he was doing it. Remember when the Pharisees were debating with Jesus and they were saying, it's not a problem that you healed someone, it's the fact that you did it on the Sabbath. It's the fact that you did it on the day of rest, a holy day. That's where the problem comes in. And maybe you've encountered some of these people, these modern day Pharisees, and maybe they've come to your church and they say, "Why are the lights so low? We don't do that at my church. Why is the music so loud? We don't do that at my church." And now the expression of their faith has become their faith. Think about it. You'll have people that'll show up just to comment. They look at the way that other churches do ministry and they critique it because it doesn't look the way that it did when they were growing up or the way that their church does ministry. And now they have this identity crisis. But I love the fact that Jesus has said, you know, you know what? There is going to be different expressions of faith. And I'm okay with that. But there are still some things that need to be very consistent. In the book of Mark, we see where Jesus has just, had this big reveal, and he says to them, "Who do men say that I am?" People are still asking that question today. Who is Jesus? And some of the apostles responded by saying, some say you're an apostle, some say that you're John the Baptist, some say that you're a prophet. But Jesus said, "Okay, that's cool, but who do you say that I am?" And Peter speaks up and he says, "You are the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah." I feel like God is going to possibly answer that question for you because I feel like some people are still asking, who is Jesus? And if not that, then what it means to really be a true follower of Christ. In Mark chapter 8, verse 34, we see that summoning the crowd along with his disciples, I want to stop right there and explain that he is summoning everyone. Jesus wants everyone. He isn't talking exclusively to certain people. This invitation is for everyone. But it says, summoning the crowd along with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone wants to be my follower, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it." So Jesus is talking to the crowd and saying what it truly means to be his follower. I want to keep this real Baptist for y'all, okay? I want to break it down. 3 points. It doesn't get any more Baptist than that. 3 points. One, first, he says you have to deny yourself. Second, take up your cross. And third, follow him. So first he says you have to deny yourself. In many cultures, people remove their shoes as a sign of respect so they don't track their dirt into your house. So they'll typically remove their shoes before entering your home or place of business. And I remember when I got this apartment, you know how it is when you get a new place. Someone comes in, they deep clean it, they might put in new carpet. Well, in my new apartment, they had just put in this brand new carpet. It was nice. It still had the vacuum marks in the rug. And I was like, all right, from day one, no one's coming into my apartment until they remove their shoes because I don't want them tracking their dirt all over my nice new rug. When you think about your feet, you think about your feet as being a form of transportation. They carry us from point A to point B and resemble the places that we've been. And the dirt on the bottom of your feet is really just a symbolism of the past that has clung to us as a reminder of where we've been. Therefore, if we're not careful, it is possible for us to allow the dirt of our past to be brought into our present and leave stains on the carpet of our future. When Jesus is saying that you need to deny yourself, he is saying that you need to disassociate yourself with your past. I love the way that Paul says it. He says, I haven't figured it all out, but there is one thing that I've learned. I have to forget the things that are behind me. The whole process of forgiving yourself is that when you look at the things that you've been through and you look at the things from your journey and you check them at the door with your shoes. That means the journey of your brokenness and even the journey of your success, because believe it or not, we can often bring in the journey of our success into our walk with God, and it distorts the way that we see Him. If I walk into the presence of God and He says He has a call on my life, and I'm still wearing the shoes of my brokenness, I will begin to say to God, you can't use me, God. I've drank. I've had sex before marriage. I've done this. I've done that. God, I'm so not worthy of you. You can't possibly use me. But when I remove my past, it gives me the ability to go boldly into what God has called me to do and not allow the condemnation of my mistakes to leave stains on the carpet of my future. The last thing that the enemy wants to do is for you to get into the presence of God and be sensitive to what He is doing. If you look in Exodus chapter 3, verse 5, God's first words to Moses is telling him to remove his shoes because the place where he is standing is holy ground. He was saying that you are standing on holy ground and your brokenness and my holiness can't coexist. When we bring our brokenness into the presence of God, it requires God to respond to it. Why do you think the enemy fights you so hard when it comes to going to church? Because the moment that you come into the presence of God, he starts responding to your brokenness. The enemy is continuously trying to keep you from healing and deliverance. In Psalms chapter 16, verse 11, it tells us that in his presence is the fullness of joy. Therefore, if in his presence is the fullness of joy, and I'm dealing with depression, then when I get in the presence of God, joy begins to overtake me. I no longer am having feelings of depression, but joy begins to overtake me. See, the enemy doesn't want you to get in the presence of God because he knows that there is healing and restoration associated with it. I remember one time I was taking in groceries and I'd left my car door open. I'd completely forgot about it. An hour went by. I'd already taken a shower, gotten ready for bed and everything else. And I was like, oh man, I left my car door open. And all I was like, I just got to go close my car door. I'm not going to worry about it. So I didn't put on, any more clothes other than my pajamas. And I walked out barefoot. Have you ever walked out without your shoes on? I am not a fan. I'll just put that out there. Not a fan of walking outside barefoot. I hate it. I see everything when I'm barefoot. I see glass. I see dog poop from where the neighbor walked their dog and didn't clean up after it. I see little rocks. I see everything. It's amazing what you see on the ground when you're barefoot and have to watch out where you step. You see some things that you typically wouldn't see if you had shoes on that you would have possibly just ran right over. Because when you have something covering the soles of your feet, you become numb to it. This is what I've learned. When you get numb to the things around you, you are leaving open doors for the enemy to come in and ransack your life. That is what happens when you don't have an open and exposed relationship with God. I want to ask you a question. Are you in a relationship with God where your feet are fully covered? Are you in a relationship with God where your soul is being buffered by your failure or your success? I want to let you know that it's okay for you to be vulnerable and take your shoes off in His presence. I also remember that, when I'd shut my car door, I had a very direct path from the car door to my house. But there was some mess in the way that I had to avoid. I could have just made a beeline straight for the door, but there was a mess on the ground that I had to maneuver around. Sometimes God will take you on an indirect path to get you where He wants you to be. He tries to navigate you around those messes in your life. Denying yourself means letting go of your past. The next thing that He says is you have to take up your cross. And that is unique because today we think of the cross and we think of cool tattoos and great one-liners that we can post on Instagram and other social media sites. It's cool today to talk about the cross. However, when Jesus was talking about taking up the cross, it wasn't a very popular symbol. Keep in mind, this was the most horrific and most punishing way that someone could die. So when Jesus was saying, take up your cross, they were thinking to themselves, now that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, Jesus. Because when you're nailed to a cross and you're in the position that they do it, it it would take 3 days before you would die. And you would have to position yourself just enough so that you wouldn't suffocate. But eventually you would die 3 days later from heart failure. Who wants to sign up for that? Jesus was saying, if you want to be a follower of me, then you have to take the things that you invest in and allow that to be a place of sacrifice. It may be a problem for you, but you'll find that when you add Jesus to your problem, there is always a solution found in Him. Jesus is saying, this very cross that represents death and destruction, when you add me to it, it produces life and restoration. Jesus tells the people to follow Him. And while this may seem simple enough, let me explain to you that this is a commitment. Following Jesus is understanding that there is someone who has a better direction for your life than you do. In a lot of cases, we aren't really following Jesus the way that we should be. It's more like we're asking Jesus to follow us. When I follow Jesus, I see my Savior's back, and I realize that Jesus has my back. He literally has my back. The book of Isaiah says that by His stripes I am healed. So when I'm following Jesus, I see the stripes on His back and I know that I am healed because I see what He has endured on my behalf. Many of us aren't following Jesus, but rather we're asking Jesus to follow us. It's like, Jesus, I made a mistake back there. Can you go back and clean that up? And then our commitment to Him is whether or not He cleans it up fast enough. Jesus, if you don't clean that up fast enough, then I'm simply not going to follow you. Are you following Jesus, or are you asking Him to follow you and clean up behind you? I remember a while back I was out with some friends to see another friend play in a band. It was at this bar and grill. We got there early, we ate, we listened to the band. It was a great time. And then come 9 p.m. and the atmosphere totally changed. The place turned into a full-out bar, and I no longer felt comfortable there for some reason. I had an old friend from church, and she came up to me. She was slightly intoxicated, to say the least, and she began to ask me how I was doing and wanted to know how my schooling was going for ministry. I want you to understand, it wasn't a sin issue at all that caused me to to feel, like I didn't want to be there any longer. It wasn't a sin issue that made me feel uncomfortable, but I felt like God was saying to me, Mike, I've set you apart. There are some things that are okay for other people, but there are some things that I can't let you be a part of because you can't appear to be common. I felt like I was no longer carrying my cross. I felt like God was asking me, can your cross be visibly seen where you are right now? For what I've called you to do, this is not a good fit for your ministry. There are certain things that God may say that you simply cannot do. Relationships. There's nothing wrong with relationships. God has designed us to crave human interaction. With the relationships that you have in your life, are you bringing your cross with you? Is your cross visibly seen within those relationships? Communication. Communication is great. God has given us lips, words, and now we have all these forms of communication that are new, like email, texting, social media, stuff like that. But there are certain conversations that God doesn't think you should be a part of. Certain gossip and things that God doesn't want us involved in. So when you find yourself engaged in certain conversations, you need to ask yourself, can I bring my cross into this dialogue? The bars and the clubs. Social outings are all good and not a big deal at all. But the reality is, when I'm in these venues, can I bring my cross? With the platforms and influence that God has given you, can people see your cross in your life? As a Christian, are you denying yourself? Are you leaving your past behind? Are you carrying your cross, elevating God in the places of your discomfort? Are you following Him, or are you asking Him to follow you? If you enter an environment where your cross can't fit through that doorway, then my motto is, if my cross can't fit, then I can't commit. God has called all of us to spread the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you're a Christ follower, then you are carrying your cross, and it should be visibly seen by others. They may not know Christ, but they'll see that you are always carrying your cross and following Him. And they can come to you and say, who is Christ? How do I get to know Christ? What does it mean to be a Christian? And you can tell them that becoming a Christian means that you're denying yourself. You're forgetting your past. You're putting aside certain aspects of your life. You're carrying your cross. You're elevating God in the places of your discomfort. You're realizing that if you add God to your problem, it then becomes a solution. And you're following Him, not asking Him to follow you. I hope that this clears up what it means to be a Christ follower. I pray that you have a great day. God bless.